The door that wouldn't stop rattling. The doorknob wouldn't stop moving. It twisted back and forth like someone was desperate to get in, shaking so hard I thought the old wooden frame would snap apart. My classmates were pressed against the walls, hidden under desks, some crying softly. The room was dark except for the glow of my phone screen tucked under my jacket. Every rattle of that knob made my chest tighten. Was it a stranger? Was it someone with a weapon? I wanted to scream, but the fear choked me silent. And just when I thought it was over, the rattling stopped. Silence. But the shadow under the door stayed. It lingered, waiting. My name is Daniel, and I was 16 when this happened. I've told this story only once before, and even then, people laughed and said I was exaggerating. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I'll never forget the sound of that rattling door. It was late autumn, and our school had been running more lockdown drills than usual. Rumors spread that there had been threats in the district, though the teachers denied it. That morning started like any other. I was in Mrs. Clark's English class, half listening, half drawing in the margins of my notebook. The classroom was on the first floor, with tall windows facing the backfield. The blinds were half open, letting in thin stripes of sunlight. When the intercom crackled, I didn't pay attention at first. Then I heard the words no one wanted to hear. Attention. This is a lockdown. This is not a drill. Lock doors. Lights off. Hide immediately. The voice was sharp and shaky, not the usual calm tone of a drill. Everyone froze. Then the room exploded into chaos. Chairs scraped, backpacks dragged, kids darted under tables. Mrs. Clark rushed to the door, twisting the lock and flicking off the lights. She hissed at us to stay quiet. My pulse spiked. I dropped to the floor, crawling behind her desk near the front. It felt safer there, at least hidden from the windows. I pulled my bag against my chest like a shield, trying to breathe quietly. The air grew heavy, filled with the sound of nervous whispers and muffled sobs. That's when I heard the first footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, echoing through the hallway outside. Then the shadow passed across the thin strip of light under our door. My stomach knotted. Someone was out there. The doorknob rattled. It wasn't a light test. It was violent, urgent, back and forth, metal clanging against the lock. I could see the shape of it moving, hear the scrape as if whoever it was wanted nothing more than to tear inside. A girl hiding by the bookshelf stifled a scream with both hands. Mrs. Clark motioned for silence, her face pale in the dim glow. The rattling continued for what felt like forever. Then it stopped, but the shadow remained. We waited. Minutes dragged. Nobody moved. Then, just when I thought it was safe, the knob twisted again, slower this time. Testing. Like whoever was out there wanted us to know they weren't leaving. I held my breath so long my chest ached. Finally, the footsteps retreated. Silence. When the announcement finally came, the campus is secure, lockdown is lifted, the whole class exhaled at once. Some kids laughed nervously, others sat frozen. I stayed put until Mrs. Clark gave us the all clear. We gathered our things cautiously, whispering questions. Nobody knew what had happened. No one explained. I shoved my bag over my shoulder, my legs shaky as I walked to the door. But before we could step into the hall, the intercom crackled again. Lockdown initiated. This is not a drill. Hide immediately. A collective groan swept the room, but it turned into panic when the doorknob rattled again, harder than before. This time, Mrs. Clark looked terrified. Her phone buzzed in her hand as she typed rapidly. Some kids crouched lower, others clutched each other. The rattling grew louder, more aggressive, like someone was slamming their weight into the door. "Please," someone whispered. "Please stop." Then the sound shifted. It wasn't just rattling. It was scraping, like metal dragging against wood. I imagined a crowbar wedged between the frame. My palms were slick with sweat. And then, silence again. 4:15 agonizing minutes. We waited. No footsteps. No voices. Just silence so thick every creak of the building made us jump. Finally, the intercom returned. "Lockdown over. You may leave safely." But no one moved. Not until a security officer opened the door from the outside and told us to get out. The hallways were buzzing with chatter. Some students said they saw cops outside. Others swore they saw someone running across the football field. The truth was, nobody knew. I left quickly, got on my bike, and pedaled home like the devil was chasing me. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that rattling knob. The next day, the principal finally spoke. He explained it away. So there had been a misunderstanding. Claimed a staff member was checking doors while police were on campus for unrelated reasons. He insisted no one was in danger. But here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. Later that week, I walked past the same classroom. The janitor had the door propped open as he worked. Out of curiosity, I glanced at the lock. The metal was bent, scratched deep, as if someone had forced something against it. And I knew right then, that wasn't just a misunderstanding. Someone had tried to get in. The stranger in the gym. The lights in the gym went out with a loud pop. 1 second we were huddled together in the corner, and the next, the room was swallowed in darkness. The echo of sneakers scuffing against the floor sent chills through me. None of those footsteps belonged to us. "Who's there?" whispered someone beside me. Silence. Then, from the far side of the gym, a voice I didn't recognize answered softly, "Don't move." My name is Maya, and I was 14 when this happened. I'll never forget it. Our school was holding a winter assembly in the gym. The bleachers were pulled out, the stage set up, and about 200 of us sat in groups while teachers bustled around setting up microphones. It was boring, the usual long speeches and reminders about exams. I was sitting with friends near the back when the fire alarm suddenly went off. The shrill ringing made everyone jump. At first, we thought it was a drill, but instead of leading us outside, the principal's voice came through the microphone, shaky and uneven. "Stay inside. Do not leave the gym. Teachers, lock the doors immediately." Confused murmurs spread through the students. Teachers rushed to the exits, locking the big double doors that led to the hallways. That's when the lights went out. The emergency lights flickered, then failed. Total darkness. At first there were nervous giggles, whispers, the sound of people fumbling for their phones. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, steady, not belonging to any teacher. They came from the far side of the gym. "Who's there?" someone called out. The voice came back, low and deliberate. "Don't move." The whole gym went silent. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and fast. A chair scraped somewhere near the stage. Then another footstep echoed, heavier this time. "Teachers," someone whispered, but none of the teachers answered. Panic spread quickly. Some kids tried to use their phones as flashlights, but the teachers hissed for everyone to turn them off. "Too much light," they said. "It could give us away." But give us away to who? I grabbed my friend's hand, my palms slick with sweat. Then came the sound of metal dragging across the floor. A bench being pulled. Maybe. No one could see in the dark, but everyone heard it. Screams erupted. The principal's voice came again, not from the microphone this time, but somewhere in the dark. "Stay calm. Stay calm. Everything is under control." But his voice was shaking. The dragging sound stopped. Heavy breathing filled the silence. Whoever was out there wasn't trying to hide. They wanted us to hear. And then, in the faint glow of a single phone someone couldn't resist turning back on, I saw it. A tall figure standing near the basketball hoop, too far to recognize. Just standing, watching. The phone light blinked off instantly, plunging us back into blackness. The next 10 minutes were the longest of my life. Shuffling footsteps, the squeak of sneakers, then the sound of something slamming against one of the gym doors, over and over, like someone trying to break it down from the outside. More screams, kids crying. Finally, a whistle blew. Not a fire alarm, a sharp, piercing whistle, like a coach would use. The lights flickered back on. The teachers herded us out through the side exit in a rush, yelling at us not to stop. We poured into the snowy courtyard, breath steaming in the air, hearts pounding. Later that day, the principal made an announcement over the intercom. He claimed it was a system malfunction, that the fire alarm and lights had cut out by accident during an inspection. He said no one was in danger, and that the staff would review procedures to avoid confusion in the future. But he never explained the footsteps. He never explained the dragging sound. And he never explained the tall figure under the basketball hoop. To this day, whenever I walk into a dark gym, I swear I hear that same voice in my head, low and calm. "Don't move." The last bus ride. The tapping wouldn't stop. Light at first, then louder. A steady rhythm against the glass, over and over. We all turned toward the big windows at the back of the classroom. The blinds were half open, just enough to see outside. That's when I saw him. A man was standing there, his face pressed against the glass, fogging it with each breath. He didn't blink. He didn't move away. He just stayed straight at us. My name is Evan, and I was 16 when this happened. It was a Thursday, and I'd been stuck in after-school detention. Nothing major, just being late too many times. Our school ran detention in room 209, an old classroom that faced the side parking lot. There were 6 of us in there that day, plus Mr. Dalton, the history teacher who supervised detention. He was the kind of teacher who didn't really care what we did as long as we stayed quiet. He sat at his desk scrolling on his phone while the rest of us spread out across the room, bored out of our minds. Outside, the sun was going down, throwing long shadows across the lot. I stayed at the clock, counting down the minutes. That's when the first tap came. At first, I thought I imagined it, a faint tick against the glass. Then it came again, louder. We all looked at the windows. Nothing, just the reflection of our own faces in the glass. Then came 3 taps in a row, sharp and deliberate. Mr. Dalton glanced up from his phone. "Knock it off," he muttered, assuming one of us was messing around. But no one had moved. The next tap was so loud it made one girl flinch and drop a pencil. We all turned to the window at the same time, and that's when we saw him. A man stood outside in the parking lot, just beyond the glass. He looked dirty, his clothes torn, his skin pale in the fading light. His face was pressed so close to the window his nose left a smay. His eyes were wide, unblinking. He didn't knock with his hand. He used his forehead, leaning forward, tapping it against the glass again and again. Tap, tap, tap. "Stay away from the window," Mr. Dalton ordered, standing now, his voice tight. He pulled out his phone and started dialing, pacing toward the door. The man outside tilted his head, still watching us. Then he smiled. For the next 10 minutes, we sat frozen while Mr. Dalton tried to call the office. No one answered. He tried the main line. Nothing. Meanwhile, the man kept moving along the row of windows, tapping different spots, never breaking eye contact. One boy whispered, "Why doesn't he just go away?" The man stopped. Then he lifted his hand and dragged his fingers slowly down the glass, leaving 5 long smears. That's when we heard it, the sound of the side door handle rattling. Someone screamed. Mr. Dalton ran to the door, shoved a heavy cabinet in front of it, and told us to get back. The rattling grew louder, more frantic, until it sounded like the door might break. Then, just as suddenly, it stopped. Silence. We sat in the dark classroom, the only sound our shallow breathing. Minutes crawled by. Mr. Dalton whispered that we needed to stay calm, that someone would notice we hadn't checked out and come looking. But no one came. The second spike hit when the fire alarm went off. A shrill ringing exploded through the building, making us all jump. Red lights flashed above the door. Mr. Dalton cursed under his breath. "Don't move," he told us. "Don't leave." But outside, through the window, we saw movement. The man was back, waving his arms wildly, pointing toward the exit doors as if urging us to come out. His grin was wide now, stretched too far across his face. "Is he the one who pulled the alarm?" a girl whispered. Before anyone could answer, the power cut out. The lights, the alarm, everything went silent. We were left in total darkness. Someone started crying. Another student fumbled for their phone flashlight, but Mr. Dalton snapped at them to turn it off. "Don't give him a target." In the dark, I could still hear the tapping. Not on the glass anymore, on the door. Slow, heavy, tap, tap, tap. My whole body shook. I pressed my fist to my ears, but it didn't help. Then, as quickly as it began, the tapping stopped. When the lights flickered back on 20 minutes later, the man was gone. We sat in stunned silence until the office finally called the room phone, telling us the fire alarm had been triggered accidentally and that we could go home. Mr. Dalton escorted us out, staying close until we reached the front entrance. But here's the part that still keeps me up at night. The next morning, when I walked past room 209, I stopped. On the outside of the windows, where the man had pressed his face, there were still smudges. Nose prints, fingerprints, streaks. And in the middle of one of the panes, scratched deep into the glass, were 3 words. "Let me in." Story 4. The locker that knocked back. I slammed the locker shut, my whole arm shaking. From inside, something had knocked back. 3 sharp raps, like knuckles on metal, and I was the only one in the hallway. My name is Ryan, and I was 16 when this happened. It was late one Thursday afternoon. Most kids had gone home already, but I had stayed behind to finish a project in the computer lab. By the time I left, the school felt hollow, like it always did when the halls emptied. The janitor's cart squeaked faintly from far away, but other than that, silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears until you can hear your own heartbeat. I headed to my locker to grab my stuff. Row after row of metal doors stretched down the hall, some dented, some covered with old stickers. The air smelled faintly of bleach. When I reached mine, I noticed something strange. The locker right next to mine, one that had been broken and taped shut since freshman year, was open a crack. At first, I thought maybe the janitor was checking it. But then, from inside, I heard it. Breathing. Shallow. Ragged. Too human to mistake for anything else. I froze. My mind scrambled for explanations. Maybe someone was hiding. A prank. But then the inside of the locker scratched. Nails or fingertips dragging along the metal. I reached out, trembling, and pulled the door a little wider. Darkness. Empty shelves. Nothing inside. I leaned closer. My own reflection stared back faintly in the dull metal wall. Then came the knock. 3 loud bangs. From the inside. That was the first spike. I stumbled back so hard I dropped my backpack. Books spilling across the tile. My heart thudded so violently it felt like it might burst out of my chest. The locker door swung wider on its hinges, though the hallway was dead still. And then, something slid out. Not a hand. Not a face. Just a folded slip of paper. It dropped onto the floor at my feet. I crouched down slowly, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. The paper was yellowed, edges crumbling, like it had been in there for years. On it, in smeared handwriting, was a single sentence. Don't be here after 6 o'clock. I glanced at the clock above the exit door. 5:57. The second spike hit. I snatched my bag and bolted down the hall. My shoes squeaked on the floor, echoing too loud, bouncing back at me from every direction. But the further I ran, the longer the hallway seemed to stretch. Lockers on either side began to rattle, one by one. First softly, then violently. Bang, bang, bang. Each door shaking as though fists were slamming against them from the inside. I clamped my hands over my ears, sprinting, nearly slipping on the smooth floor. When I reached the end of the hall, the exit door was chained shut. My breath came in ragged gasps. I spun, searching for another way out, but the windows were all covered with metal grates. The rattling grew louder, lockers buckling against their locks, some bending outward. And then, one flung open. A figure crawled out. Not a monster, not some impossible creature. A boy, my age. His face pale, eyes sunken like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. His clothes were old, torn, stained. He stared at me with hollow eyes, then whispered, "They won't let me leave." That was the third spike. Dozens of lockers burst open in unison, doors slamming against the walls. Shapes spilled out. Students, or things that looked like students. Their faces blurred, some missing features entirely. Their limbs bent wrong, their skin pale as paper. They staggered into the hall, all whispering in unison. "Stay, stay, stay." I shoved past them, heart pounding, clawing at the exit chain with my bare hands until they bled. The figures shuffled closer, their whispers pressing into my ears. Finally, the chain snapped loose. I threw the door open and burst into the cool evening air. I didn't stop running until I was halfway home. When I finally looked back, the school loomed behind me, perfectly normal. Windows dark, halls empty. The next morning, everything looked the same. Lockers shut, kids laughing, teachers teaching. But when I reached my locker, my hands went cold. There, tucked neatly into the slats, was another folded note. This one read, "Next time, don't run." Story 5. Trapped in the library. The heavy doors slammed shut, and I realized we weren't alone. I swear I heard footsteps echoing between the shelves, slow, deliberate, even though the librarian had already left. My flashlight beam shook across the rows of books. and that's when I saw a figure crouched at the far end, watching. And the worst part, the only way out was locked. My name is Ethan, and this happened when I was 16. It was a Thursday evening, and I had detention for skipping gym class. My punishment? Helping organize the library after hours. The librarian, Mrs. Green, was supposed to stay with me, but she got a call halfway through and said she had to leave early. Just stack the returns on the cart. I'll handle the rest tomorrow, she told me, grabbing her bag. Before I could argue, she was gone, heels clicking down the hallway. The doors thudded shut, and silence swallowed the room. I didn't like being alone in the library at night. At first, I tried to distract myself, stacking books and humming quietly. The place smelled like dust and old paper. The only light came from the overhead fluorescents, some of which flickered faintly. But after about 10 minutes, I heard something strange. A whisper. I froze, clutching the book in my hand. It wasn't words, just a low hiss, like someone breathing too close to my ear. I spun around. Nothing. Just rows of shelves stretching into shadows. That was the first spike. I told myself I was imagining things, but when I returned to the desk, the book cart had moved. Not far, just a foot or two, but enough to make my stomach drop. The wheels squeaked slightly, like they'd just been pushed. "Hello," I called, my voice cracking. No answer. The silence was heavier now, pressing against me. I grabbed my backpack, deciding I was done. But when I reached the exit and pulled on the handle, it didn't move. The doors were locked from the outside. I banged on them, shouted down the hall, but nobody came. The walls swallowed my voice. That's when the lights began to flicker. One by one, they buzzed and dimmed until only a few in the back remained on. The library looked different in the half-dark. Endless aisles, shadows stretching long and deep. And then I heard it again. Footsteps. Slow, steady, between the shelves. I spun, heart pounding. Who's there? This time, I got an answer. A faint laugh. I grabbed the nearest thing I could, a metal ruler from the desk, and held it like a weapon. My flashlight app was on my phone, weak but enough to cut through the shadows. I moved toward the sound, every step making my sneakers squeak against the floor. That's when I saw it. At the far end of an aisle, between history and fiction, a figure crouched low, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. It wasn't moving, just watching. I blinked, and the figure slipped sideways into the next aisle. Gone. That was the second spike. I wanted to scream, but my throat locked up. I forced myself to the emergency exit near the back, but the bar didn't push. A thick chain wrapped around it. Panic spread through me like fire. I turned, scanning the room. That's when I noticed something chilling. The books. Some of them were sliding out of the shelves on their own, tumbling to the ground in a slow, steady rhythm. Thud, thud, thud. Each sound echoed through the room. I couldn't take it anymore. I ducked behind a reading table and crawled underneath, clutching my phone like a lifeline. That's when I heard the whisper again. This time, it was right behind me. I spun so fast I smacked my head on the underside of the table. My flashlight beam shook wildly. No one was there. But when I looked at the table's surface above me, words had been scratched into the wood. Fresh scratches, sharp and jagged. Stay until closing. My whole body went cold. The air grew heavier, harder to breathe. I couldn't tell if it was fear or something else, but my chest tightened. That's when the third spike came. The lights went out completely. Pitch black. I scrambled out from under the table, waving my flashlight around, the beam slicing through the dark. Shadows shifted everywhere, too fast for me to track. Then I heard running, not mine. Someone was sprinting between aisles, circling me. The sound grew louder, closer, until I couldn't tell which direction it came from. Stop! I screamed, tears stinging my eyes. Everything went silent again. Then a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I whipped around, swinging the metal ruler as hard as I could. It connected with something solid, and I heard a grunt of pain. The figure stumbled back into the beam of my flashlight. It wasn't a ghost. It was a man. Tall, thin, dressed in black. His face was pale, eyes wide and crazed, like he hadn't slept in days. He bayed his teeth at me, then lunged again. I ran. My lungs burned as I sprinted down the aisle, shoving books aside. He was fast, faster than me, his footsteps slamming against the floor just feet behind. I dove toward the librarian's desk. fumbling with the drawers. My hand wrapped around something cold and heavy, scissors. When he reached for me, I slashed wildly. The blade caught his arm, and he yelped, jerking back. That gave me just enough time. I scrambled onto the desk and smashed the flashlight against the smoke detector on the ceiling. The alarm shrieked, filling the library with a piercing wail. Minutes later, red and blue lights flashed through the windows. Officers burst through the front doors, tackling the man before he could escape. I collapsed against the desk, shaking so hard I could barely breathe. One officer knelt beside me, asking if I was okay, but I could only nod. When they dragged the man out, I caught one last look at him. He wasn't struggling, he was smiling, and as they hauled him away, he mouthed something to me. "See you at closing." Story 6. The cafeteria doors wouldn't open. The double doors rattled as I pushed with all my strength, but they wouldn't budge. Behind me, trays clattered to the floor, and someone was breathing hard. Too close, too heavy. Lightning flashed through the high windows, and for a split second, I saw a tall shadow standing between the rows of tables, watching me. The storm outside roared, but inside, it was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. That was when I realized we weren't supposed to be in there. My name's Lena, and I was 15 when this happened. It was late on a Friday, and the storm outside had gotten so bad that our after-school club was told to wait it out in the cafeteria instead of heading home. There were 4 of us left. Me, my best friend Cara, and 2 boys from track who I barely talked to. The cafeteria looked different at night. The lights were dim, most of the chairs stacked on tables, and the smell of old food hung in the air. Rain pounded the windows, and every now and then, thunder shook the room. The janitor had checked on us once, said he'd be back in an hour, but he never came back. At first, it wasn't too bad. We sat around one of the long tables, scrolling on our phones, joking nervously whenever the lights flickered. But then the power cut out completely, leaving only the gray flashes of lightning to light the room. We groaned, pulled out our phone flashlights, and tried to laugh it off. But laughter didn't last long, because not 10 minutes later, we heard it. A bang from the kitchen. That was the first spike. We froze, staring at the swinging metal doors. Another bang followed, louder this time, like someone slamming a pot onto the floor. "Probably the wind," Cara whispered, but her voice shook. The boys exchanged looks. One of them, Dylan, grabbed a chair like it was a weapon and said, "I'll check." We told him not to, but he pushed through the doors anyway. The metal swung shut behind him, and for a moment, it was quiet again. Too quiet. Then he screamed. We all bolted to the doors. I shoved them open, but the kitchen was dark, lit only by flashes of lightning from a high window. Dylan was on the floor, scrambling backward, eyes wide. "What happened?" I shouted. He pointed toward the walk-in freezer. The door was cracked open, and inside, something shifted. I couldn't make out details, but it was tall. Too tall. Cara yanked me back into the cafeteria. "Close it," she yelled, and the other boy slammed the doors shut. We stood there, breathing hard, listening to the silence that followed. We decided to leave. Forget the storm. Walking home in the rain was better than staying there. But when we tried the exit doors, they didn't move. Not locked. Jammed. Like someone was holding them shut from the outside. We tried the other side of the cafeteria. Same thing. That's when the overhead lights flickered back on for a split second. Just long enough for me to see it. The tall shadow, standing at the end of the tables, completely still. When the lights went dark again, it was gone. That was a second spike. We scrambled for another exit, but every door we tried wouldn't open. Panic set in. The boys shoved chairs under the handles, whispering that maybe someone had broken in. But who? And why? We backed into one corner, our flashlights shaking as we scanned the room. Then we heard it. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps moving across the tile. They circled the cafeteria, growing closer, then stopping just out of sight. My breath caught in my throat as I shined my phone light across the tables. Something had been carved into the surface of one. Fresh scratches, long and deep. "Stay until serving." The words made my stomach flip. Cara grabbed my hand. "What does that mean?" Before I could answer, a tray crashed to the floor near the kitchen. We all spun, lights shaking, and there it was. A figure stepped out, tall and gaunt, face hidden under a hood, arms dangling too long at his sides. That was the third spike. He didn't rush. He just stood there, swaying slightly, like he was listening to our breathing. Then, slowly, he started walking toward us. We scattered. The boys ran for the doors again, slamming against them in desperation. Kara pulled me behind a stack of chairs. My heart hammered so loud I thought he could hear it. He moved through the room, dragging one hand along the tables, his fingernails scraping against the wood. The sound made my skin crawl. Then he stopped right by our hiding spot. I squeezed Kara's hand so hard she winced. The man tilted his head, sniffing the air. Then, just like that, he walked past, his footsteps fading. We didn't waste time. We crawled out, whispering frantically to the boys. Together, we grabbed the closest thing we could use as weapons, broom handle from a supply closet, and made a plan. If we couldn't get out through the doors, we'd have to break a window. But before we moved, thunder crashed so loud the whole building shook. And when the lightning lit up the cafeteria, the man was suddenly standing right by the windows, blocking our only escape. We froze. He pressed his hand flat against the glass, leaving a streak of dirt as he dragged it slowly downward. His head tilted again, like he was smiling under that hood. Then the lights flickered back on, all of them this time. And he was gone. Just gone. We didn't wait. Dylan grabbed a chair and hurled it at the nearest window. Glass shattered, rain spraying inside. One by one, we climbed out, cutting our hands and arms on the shards. We ran through the storm, never looking back, until we reached the main road. When we finally flagged down a police car, the officer drove us back to the school. But the cafeteria, empty. No signs of forced entry. The kitchen spotless. No trays on the floor. No scratches on the tables. Almost like nothing had happened. But I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night, when thunder rattles my windows, I swear I can still hear those footsteps in the dark. Story 7. Locked in the museum. I pressed my face against the glass, pounding with both fists, but no one outside could hear me. Behind me, the sound of footsteps echoed through the museum hall, slow, heavy, deliberate. I turned just in time to see a tall figure step out from behind one of the dinosaur skeletons. He wasn't supposed to be there. My name is Caleb, and I was 16 when this happened. Our history class took a field trip to the City Museum. It was one of those massive places with marble floors, echoing halls, and towering exhibits that made you feel small. I wasn't excited, but it beat sitting in class. The trip went fine. Guided tours, notes for our assignment, lunch in the courtyard. But near the end of the day, I wandered away from the group. I just wanted a few minutes of quiet. Big mistake. I found myself in the Hall of Ancient Civilizations, where they kept artifacts behind glass, weapons, statues, even a full mummy case. The room was dim and silent, and for a while, I just walked slowly, dragging my fingers along the cool marble railing. When I finally turned to leave, I realized something chilling. The doors were shut. At first, I thought they'd swing open easily, but when I tugged, they wouldn't move. I tried the other set. Same thing. That's when the lights flickered. The first spike hit. The overhead bulbs buzzed, dimmed, then cut out entirely, leaving me in near darkness. Only the red exit signs glowed faintly. I told myself it was just the storm outside. Thunder had been rolling all afternoon. But then I heard it. A sound that didn't fit. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, echoing across the marble. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Hello," I called. My voice cracked in the hollow space. No answer. The footsteps stopped. I moved toward the doors again, yanking harder, but they were sealed tight. Panic rose in my chest. I pulled out my phone. No service. That's when I saw it. In the glass reflection of the mummy case, a tall shape stood just behind me. I spun around. Nothing. But when I looked back at the reflection, the shape was still there. That was the second spike. I staggered back, nearly tripping over the base of a display. My phone light shook across the room, scanning the shadows between exhibits. And that's when I noticed something worse. The glass on one of the cases was cracked, the one holding a set of ancient weapons. The crack hadn't been there earlier. I knew because I'd taken a picture for my notes. Now, shards glittered on the floor. Something had broken it from the inside. My breathing turned shallow. I whispered to myself, "It's just the storm. Just the storm." But the storm didn't explain the heavy breathing I now heard from the far end of the hall. I raised my phone light again and froze. The figure was there this time. No reflection. No tricks. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in dark clothes. He didn't move. Just stood between the skeleton of a triceratops and the shadow of a towering statue. Then, slowly, he stepped forward. I bolted. My sneakers squeaked across the marble as I darted down a side hall. My flashlight beam jumped across paintings and displays, throwing huge shadows on the walls. The footsteps followed. Closer. Louder. I ducked into the Egyptian exhibit, hiding behind a stone pillar. My chest heaved as I pressed myself flat against the cold surface. For a moment, silence. Then a whisper. Low, raspy. I couldn't make out words. But it was close. Too close. That was the third spike. I clamped my hand over my mouth, fighting the urge to sob. The whispering circled the room, echoing, until it stopped right beside my hiding place. I shut my eyes tight. When I opened them again, something made my stomach drop. Carved into the pillar I leaned against, fresh scratches, jagged and uneven, were the words. "Stay after hours." I stumbled back, choking on a gasp. My phone slipped from my hand, clattering loudly on the floor. The footsteps pounded toward me instantly. I grabbed the phone and ran again, my legs screaming, lungs burning. I turned corner after corner, desperate for any open door, any sign of escape. Finally, I saw it. The glass wall of the entrance lobby. Rain streamed down outside, lightning flashing across the city skyline. I slammed into the glass, pounding, screaming for help. No one answered. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder. I pressed my face against the glass, sobbing. And that's when I saw it. A security guard. He was walking his rounds outside, umbrella in hand, eyes scanning the sidewalk. Relief exploded in my chest. I banged on the glass harder, screaming his name. But he didn't look, didn't even flinch. It was like he couldn't see me. I turned, desperate, and there he was again. The figure, standing not 10 feet away, face still hidden, hands hanging loose at his sides. Lightning flashed, and I finally saw his face. It wasn't a stranger. It was the janitor. He'd been with us earlier on the trip, sweeping the halls. I hadn't even noticed him leave. Now he stood in the dark, eyes wide and unblinking, lips stretched into a smile that didn't look human. The last thing I remember before the lights went out completely was his voice, finally clear this time. "The museum closes at 9. And you're mine." When I woke, I was lying on the museum steps outside, rain soaking through my clothes. My classmates and teacher were there, shouting, asking where I'd been. They said they'd looked for me for over an hour. But when I asked about the janitor, the guide frowned. "There hasn't been a janitor here in years," she said. Story 8. The phone call after midnight. I held the phone to my ear, trembling, as the voice on the other end whispered my name. It wasn't my mom. It wasn't my dad. It was me. My name is Elena, and I was 15 when it happened. It was a Friday night, and my parents were out at a dinner party. I stayed home, curled up on the couch with popcorn, watching a movie. Nothing scary, just a comedy. The rain outside tapped against the windows, and the house was quiet except for the TV. At some point, my phone buzzed. A private number. I almost didn't answer. I wish I hadn't. "Hello," I said, pressing it to my ear. For a second, nothing, just static. Then, soft breathing. I sat up, uneasy. "Who's this?" And then, my name. Whispered, "Elena." The first spike hit. I froze, staring at the dark window across the room. My own voice had whispered my name. Exactly like me. Same pitch, same rhythm. I hung up instantly, heart racing. Just a prank, I muttered to myself, trying to laugh it off. Kids at school mess with each other all the time. But then the phone buzzed again. Same number. Against my better judgment, I answered. This time, the voice said, "I'm in the house." I jumped off the couch, spinning around, scanning the shadows. Every creak of the old wood floor made my chest tighten. I called out, "This isn't funny. Silence. Then, from upstairs, I heard it. A thump. I grabbed the fireplace poker and crept up the staircase, every step louder than it should have been. The hallway upstairs was dark, doors closed, shadows long. I held my breath, waiting for another sound. My phone buzzed again. I lifted it with shaking hands. This time, the voice whispered, "Don't go in your room." That was the second spike. My bedroom door was at the very end of the hall. I stayed at it, my palms slick with sweat. "Who are you?" I whispered. No reply, just breathing. I edged closer, the floor creaking under me. My phone light cut a narrow path through the dark. And then, the knob on my bedroom door turned. Slowly, deliberately, I stumbled back, choking down a scream. My phone slipped in my hand, but before it hit the ground, I heard the voice again. "You're already inside." I bolted down the stairs, my heart hammering like it would break my ribs. That was the third spike. I ran for the front door, twisting the lock, but it wouldn't budge. My sweaty fingers slipped, and when I finally got it open, the chain was hooked. From the inside, I didn't put that chain on. Taze blurred my vision as I scrambled for the back door. Same thing, locked tight, chain hooked. I tried the windows, but they wouldn't move. And then I saw it. On the kitchen counter, my phone, but I was still holding mine in my hand. The other phone buzzed. I crept closer, breath shaking, and picked it up. The screen lit up. Private number. I answered. The voice whispered, "Turn around." I spun, swinging the poker wildly, but no one was there. The room was empty. Then, upstairs, my bedroom door slammed shut. I ran out of the kitchen, not knowing where to go, when headlights flashed across the window. My parents' car. Relief flooded through me. They came in, dripping from the rain, setting down umbrellas. I rushed to them, sobbing, trying to explain everything. The calls, the voice, the doors. They searched the whole house. Closets, attic, basement. Nothing. Dad even laughed. Scary movie night, huh? But when I showed them the second phone, their smiles froze. It was the exact same model as mine. Same case. Same cracks on the corner. My mom picked it up, frowning. It was my phone. And then mine, the one in my hand, buzzed. The same private number lit the screen. And before anyone could stop me, I answered. The voice whispered, soft, calm, final. "You should have listened." And the line went dead.